You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is Lee Matlone. Writers, I have an amazing tool to tell you about. A revolutionary writing tool for planning stories. Campfire Pro is what novelists need to go from the seed of an idea to a detailed plan that's ready to be executed. Complete your character design, create a timeline, and track your world building all in one place with our downloadable desktop app for Mac and PC. Without the annoying subscription model so many apps are using today. Visit campfiretechnology.com for special holiday pricing on Campfire Pro today. Who Wants to Love a Billionaire? Billionaires in New York, Book 1 by Laura Burton. Do you have a favorite writer whose books are auto-buys for you? Wouldn't you love for readers to have you on their auto-buy list, then recommend your books to their friends and on social media? The good news is there are subtle things you can do, things that are nearly invisible to the reader, that will make your stories unputdownable. The Beyond 10 Days course from Victory Editing can help you get the most from your stories and help you build that relationship with readers through your writing. This course is full of awesome, and best of all, you don't have to fly across the country or put on pants. In this course, we'll focus on avoiding info dumps, dialogue mechanics, show versus tell in dialogue, carrying show versus tell forward to your narrative, deepening your point of view and strengthening your protagonist's voice, overwriting and how to avoid it. 10 hours of video content with text and audio downloads. Shine that diamond. Join me at the Beyond 10 Days course. Go to hankgarner.com and click the banner to sign up today. Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web. The Feisty Heroine romance collection of short stories. Over 30 plus pulse racing shorts to capture your heart with USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and award-winning authors in the mix. Paranormal, contemporary, fantasy, and historical romance that will whet your appetite with titillating, heart-pounding tales you'll want to read again, then beg for more. Fall in love with your next book crush. Pre-order this amazing collection of shorts, over 30 pulse-pounding stories for only 99 cents.
Proceed with caution.
Buying this collection may lead to addictive reading, falling in love with your next book crush, and staying up past your bedtime to see what happens next.
Get your limited edition copy of Feisty Heroines. Look for the link in the show notes of this episode. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Lee Matlone on the show with me today. She has a fantastic new book. It's called it's called Homemaking. And this is a really unique book. I loved reading it. So thank you for joining me today, Lee.
Thank you.
Lee, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
So I don't think I have a singular memory. I was always a reader and writer when I was younger. I think I wrote a lot of sort of goofy horror stories or something, little just exercises, nothing particularly serious. But I think I really realized that I wanted to write consistently pretty late in my freshman year of college when I took an introduction to creative writing workshop. And that's really when I think became dedicated to this thing of, waking up every day and writing and I guess trying to express myself in that way and revolve my life around writing. So yeah, there was no epiphanic moment. Unfortunately, it was a little more boring than that.
Were you a bookish kid? Did you read a lot?
Yeah, I did read a lot, and I think I owe that a lot to my mother. She actually is a physician, like in my book, but she was always reading. There were always books around, so I think it was really critical for me in my development as a reader and writer just to see books around all the time and see a person who's so formative in my life reading and seeing how that helped her as an individual, even though she wasn't, an academic and English professor or, someone who worked in the humanities, sort of like seeing how writing and reading can enrich anyone's life was really important.
We kind of get caught up in this writer world sometimes, and I think it's easy to forget just how important story is, for people that are not in this world, that, we all need to experience life, through other people's eyes and to walk in other people's shoes. And story is what, gives us that ability. And I think it's so easy to lose sight of that, just how important this is to other people that are not obsessed with story like we might be.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I teach students who are not primarily English majors, and I think I really enjoy sort of seeing how a pre-med student or a pre-law student or an engineer or a nutrition major can be enriched by books and writing, how their disciplines can enrich, my understanding of writing and things like that. So I try not to just live only in a writer's world. You know what I mean? So.
Do you remember as a kid a particular book, a particular author or series that just kind of lit your brain on fire, that just engrossed you, or, did you just kind of consume, broadly and everything?
I consumed everything. I think as a kid, there wasn't one series in particular. I do have a memory of being like 8 or something and trying to read a book that was far beyond my comprehension, but it was like something I was trying to prove to myself, like, oh, I'm capable of understanding this even if I wasn't at the time. And like I think I was always just trying to, or I guess the better way of saying this is my sense of self-worth is wrapped up in reading challenging books at a young age for some reason. But I remember the first book as a teenager that really made me realize the power of literature, made me fall in love with it, was All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren. I was in AP literature class, and something about that book, I think it's just the line level writing, which is really sort of what I'm passionate about as a writer, is the sentence and the sounds of words. And Penn Warren is really also, I think he was one of the only people to win Nobel Prize for poetry and fiction. Does that sound right? Not the Pulitzer Prize, sorry, for poetry and fiction. So the ability to sort of weave together beautiful sentences into this powerful narrative, I think, is something that is really unique in his work, and something I think I'm always striving to do in my own now.
Tell me about this creative writing workshop that changed your life.
This creative writing workshop. So I went to the University of Virginia, and they have a very strong graduate creative writing program, but they also have a somewhat intensive undergraduate creative writing program. And I went to undergrad thinking that I would go into politics or international relations, and I don't know why I took this creative writing workshop. I mean, I guess I am, like I said, I've always been interested in reading and writing. And just took this small little workshop, 15 people in it. And I think if I had to pinpoint one story or event in that workshop that made me want to commit to this writing thing is reading Boys by Rick Moody, which is this really beautiful, like tight 4-page story, maybe in one long paragraph, that presents the life of these two boys from infancy to adulthood. I think that story just really was so powerful and beautiful, and made me realize like the magic that can happen in fiction and in writing. So yeah, I think that was really the biggest event that made me want to write.
When that happened and you could see yourself as a writer for the first time, because we all go through that little epiphany, that awakening, if you will. That stories are not just something that we love, but there may be something that we do. Was there something in mind when you had that awakening, like this is going to be the kind of story that I tell, or did that desire to write come with kind of a pre-planned story, or was it just this thing that I feel like I now have the superpower, this is something I could do?
I think if I understand what you're saying, there's never a specific story I felt like I needed to tell. I think as far as my writing aesthetic and interest as a writer, it's really about capturing rather the sort of mundane aspects of life and sort of applying them or honing in on them through language. And so I'm sure that's apparent in my book and in the stories I write as well. So it wasn't to say that I suddenly realized I had the language and ability to tell a certain story. It was just realizing that the language I had was something I could do to just illuminate things around me and make the world slightly more, maybe it was, I think perhaps the best way of saying is writing for me is a way of managing the sort of inexplicable facets of life and all the things that frustrate me, and I think attacking those things in nice sentences is somehow cathartic or helpful for me as a person. So it was really a gift, I think, taking that workshop and finding this way of managing life early on.
What was that initial experience as you began writing? Did you run into difficulty with it? Was it ever discouraging? Just kind of talk about your early writing experience for a minute, if you would.
It was certainly discouraging because I think the story, especially back then, this was sort of before flash fiction and shorter fiction really became popular. And so the model in workshop was often some like an Alice Munro story or a Chekhov story or something that's somewhat traditional in structure. You have this 30-page story, it's linear, and I was just never good at that as a writer. Even in academic settings, I always wrote very tightly and succinctly. So having those models of these like very sprawling, linear narratives was really intimidating, and for a long time made me feel like I wasn't a real writer because I didn't write that way. So I think for a long time I tried to write in that sort of model, or write these sort of very like male work oriented stories. I read a lot of, as most of us did at that time, like white men were the stories we read. And so I thought that's what I had to write like, and I was sort of trying to fit myself into that mold for a long time. And like I read maybe Maggie Nelson's Bluettes, and that book I think I read that after undergrad for sure, but that was sort of a pivotal moment in my writing life in which I realized, you can write other ways, and those are valid too. So yeah, I think I was a little crippled early in my writing life by these models that I just couldn't live up to.
Well, it's really interesting that we all kind of write out of our influences in the beginning, and to a certain degree, I think we kind of need to do that and write what we know while we find our voice. Sometimes, it's easier to inhabit someone else's voice while we try to figure out what it is about us that is different. Do you remember when you really found your specific voice, and when, because this book, the new book, Homemaking, you have a very specific resonant voice. This is definitely Lee Matlone. You're not wearing someone else's coat while writing, so to speak. When did you kind of settle in and realize, okay, this is where I am, and this is the story in me that needs to come out?
I think it was after undergraduate. I took a few years off between my undergrad and my MFA program, and every time I'd apply to a writing conference and go and do that for a week or 10 days, or however long the program was in the summer. So I went to Sewanee and Tin House and Breadloaf, and sort of got to just check in with the writing community and my work. But other than that, I was really allowed to just sort of develop my voice without any external criticism, which I think is really important for me. Because I think one of the downsides of being in workshop consistently or being in school is that you're constantly getting other people's opinion about what you should and should not be doing. And so I think it was good for me as far as my development as a writer to just flounder out there on my own, and then, get feedback once a year in a really intensive environment. And so, I just did that for a number of years, and somewhere in there, I think I figured out my voice. And I think in graduate school, I just continued to sort of develop that further. But it was really that sort of space to just experiment on my own. I think that was really important.
Well, Homemaking is your debut novel, but this is not the only writing that you've been doing. What other sorts of things have you been working on and publishing, to work out those writing muscles and to, be a wide-ranging type of author?
So I was writing a column for the Rumpus for a long time on death and loss, which is sort of just an accidental column that I wandered into in my writing life. And so that was something I was doing consistently for a number of years, that allowed me to, I guess, engage with themes that I wasn't overtly aware of myself, but now I'm realizing are very deeply ingrained in my writerly brain. And so I was doing that, interviewing people and writing little essays, and I would be writing short stories. I would do a little bit of journalism, going out and covering various things. I was living in New Orleans for a long time. So, I really felt like I needed to be writing at all times and meeting different people. As a writer, it's really important for me to interact, as I sort of said earlier, with people who are not other writers and sort of hear about other experiences that are different than my own. So, writing magazine pieces was a really great way of doing that, or the column was an avenue for meeting these individuals who I would not necessarily have met if I was just working on the novel or just writing short stories. So I'm grateful for having those opportunities in my 20s to really look into other people's lives in that professional writing way.
Do you feel like writing those columns and kind of building a body of work that is shorter in scope, but kind of ultimately builds something larger and a larger sort of conversation with you and your readers. Do you feel like that helps you as a novelist, and what kind of things do you take away as a novelist from that sort of writing?
I think it's all of a piece. I certainly never intended to write a novel. I always thought of myself as a short form writer. I think my interest in loss or this death work or I wrote about a lot of Louisiana specific happenings because that's where I was, and that obviously went into the novel. So without realizing it, I think a lot of those things just ended up in my fiction and in my novel. And it wasn't, I see them all as being related. As you can see from my book, there are a lot of references to other texts in architecture and aesthetics and philosophy. I'm a person who's very much curious about everything, and that always ends up in my work in some way, in my novel, my fiction writing.
So let's talk about the novel. Homemaking is such a wide-ranging story, yet so close and personal at the same time. This cast of characters is really unique. How did the story begin for you? And when you start thinking of a piece of fiction, what's that kernel of an idea that usually comes first? Is it a character? Is it a setting? Is it some sort of plot device, and then people inhabit that? How does it generally begin for you?
Generally speaking, there's some sort of, I get a lot from the news or from some line of dialogue I hear. There's little bits that I pick up from the world that just stick in my brain. I'm thinking of this one story in particular that I've been working on for years and can't figure out how to write, but is based on this piece I read in some local newspaper in Maryland, I think, about this woman who went out into the woods and left her quadriplegic son there and sort of abandoned him there. And I thought that was such a fascinating, awful, compelling thing that I wanted to figure out a way to write about it. So oftentimes that's how I come across an idea. I get obsessed with some sort of piece of information, some event. It's not really a character necessarily, although I guess you could say that was the mother character was someone I was interested in who could do such a thing. How do you humanize a person like that? Or obviously there is humanity in a person like that, and how do you bring that out? Because I think that is always a goal in literary fiction, at least, is to bring as much humanity to a character as possible and create empathy in that sort of way. But with the novel specifically, like I said, I didn't really plan to write a novel, and I was working on this sort of longer novella thing that was about some of the same themes or interested in sort of the same ideas as the Chloe section of the novel now, but I ended up scrapping it. And then one day I sat down, I remember I was at my little studio apartment in New Orleans, woke up and wrote essentially the introduction to the novel. And after some more writing time, I realized that section connected to this sort of other novella-like thing that I was working on. And all these pieces just sort of coalesced. I just realized that they were related and that I had a bigger sort of beast on my hands than what I had thought. So I just happened into this book and in this world of characters. So yeah, that's sort of the creation story of it.
Talk about those two characters, Sybil and Chloe, for just a minute, if you would, because what a great tension that you set up in the book with these characters, both with their own story and with their own experience that are intertwined, and yet, that struggle between, what we're given in life, what we do with it. It's such an amazing exploration.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the relationships between mothers and daughters is something that I am very much interested in. I myself am very close to my mother, and that tension is really compelling and complex. And I think the closer you are to a parent, the stranger and weirder it is, as far as like how they influence you. And I guess my interest in them is just we're all trying to, I guess, figure out where we fit in our own individuated ways. And so for Cybil, it's, being this biracial adopted child in post-war America, and, trying to carve out some sort of identity in that way. And then for Chloe, it's, this sort of contemporary struggle that I feel like a lot of millennial women specifically maybe are trying to figure out, is how do you have this domestic sort of fantasy and, have your own career and interest. Sometimes it feels like, speaking as one, it feels somewhat impossible. And yet, we still, I think, have this very retro 1950s standard of domesticity, like the nuclear family and the house, the fence and the yard and the dogs and the good schools and all of that, even though it feels kind of antiquated in some ways. So, yeah, I think these characters, they're close. Obviously, their blood, their struggles to figure out who they are and where they belong are just very individual. I'm just interested in how they commiserate and then how they diverge and those things.
Excuse me, I had to sneeze. With that relationship, that the mother and daughter relationship would have been an amazing story all on its own. But then you kind of throw us a twist and you introduce us to the character of Bo, and the story takes, a whole different twist and turn. Tell us about Bo and what his story brings to the book.
I think a big part of the book is about how we create our own families, and that it's about more than just blood relations, and that, I think that there's this idea that just because you're blood related, you're supposed to feel connected and you're supposed to make these efforts to connect these people. But oftentimes those people aren't necessarily the ones that we have real relationships with, the people that matter most to us. So Bo and Chloe's relationship is obviously very important to both of them, and at least in the writing process, he wasn't going to have his own section, and when he did, it was very small portion of the book. But ultimately, as I looked more into his life, I realized that he needed to be a bigger part of the book, and that he had his own narrative and story that I really wanted to exist alongside this mother-daughter relationship, because Bo is supportive of Chloe, and in his own way, because he's supportive of Chloe, he's important to Cybil, and it's just an interconnected world, and I wanted that all to be, again, of a piece. So Bo grew up in like Cajun part of Louisiana, sort of poor, rural. I lived in Lake Charles, Louisiana. That's where I went to grad school. So it's a very insular sort of community. People tend to stay there or stay in the area. And if you're a little bit different, like Bo is, then it can feel a little bit scary and limiting. And so I think it was a good pressurized environment for him to be in, as far as being a character. He's queer and grappling with his sexuality, but he's also not someone interested in labels. And so he gets out of Louisiana, and he is a sculptor, and he forms this friendship with Chloe, and when they're at the university together. And yeah, they're just they have a really interesting dynamic, and I think that throughout the book I'm trying to sort of avoid labels or easy sort of definitions of family or sexuality, of love. And I think Beau's story is just another iteration of that, how all the characters are dealing with this sort of, they don't fit into any one category, and there's a pressure to fit into a category. And so, yeah, he's just another one of those characters dealing with those things in his own way.
Well, it's a really interesting way to explore these feelings that we all go through, and these connections that can be difficult. And Beau gives us another view into that, and you start realizing as the book goes on that we may be so very far different from each other, yet some of these deeper struggles are really kind of manifestations of the same wants and desires.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're all, feeling like we have to figure out where we fit in. And right now, I think there's a very great pressure to sort of conform to a singular identity. And even though I think it's just because of we're more racially integrated and the world is more integrated and everything is much more complex, and I feel like it's more difficult to be in this one box. So that pressure can be really immense and stressful, I think. So I think it's just it's an idea that I'm interested in general, and it's interesting to see characters grappling with that.
Absolutely. Lee, when someone finishes this book, when they get to the end, what do you hope they're left with?
Some sense of connection to the world outside of themselves, I think, which is always the comfort of a great book. You feel less alone with whatever you're struggling with, and that you can commiserate with this other narrative. And so, yeah, also just like, oh, that's a sentence, and I'm going to remember that. But yeah, feeling a little less, to sort of reiterate a cliche of writers, like feeling less alone with whatever they're dealing with.
Right. I love the book. I love the story and what you're doing with it. Lee, this is your debut novel. This has been a while coming. Once you kind of go through that whole process and the editorial process, and this thing that sometimes feels like is never going to happen is out there in the world now, what do you find yourself doing and thinking about now?
I just really want to be back in my writing hole. And there's something really pure about this early stages where you feel like no one will ever read what you're writing. I'm just looking forward to immersing myself in that space again. So
I love it. If people are just learning about you, is there a place where they can find out more about you online and follow along for news coming up and stuff like that?
Yeah, I have a website, just my name.com, and I have a Twitter and Instagram, all of those things. So I'll have updates about a number of book events I have coming up in the spring. So hopefully people can come out to those if they're interested.
Excellent. The book is called Making Home, a novel. Lee, this has been so much fun talking. I hope you have major success with the book, and it's available everywhere now. There are links to it in the show notes of this episode. We'll also link up your website where people can find you. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Stay tuned now for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Fox's The Ember War.
The near future. Humanity's only hope of survival entered the solar system at nearly the speed of light. The probe slowed as the sun's heliosphere disrupted the graviton wave it rode in on from the abyss of deep space. Awakened by the sudden deceleration, the probe absorbed the electromagnetic spectrum utilized by its target species and assessed the technological sophistication of the sole sentient species on Earth. The probe adjusted its course to take it into the system's primary. If the humans couldn't survive, with its help, what was to come? Then the probe would annihilate itself. There would be no trace of it for the enemy, and no chance of humanity's existence beyond the time it had until the enemy arrived. The probe analyzed filed patents, military expenditures, birth rates, mathematical advancement, and space exploration. The first assessment fell within the margin of error of survival and extinction for humanity. The probe's programming allowed for limited, autonomous decision-making, choice being a rare luxury for the probe's class of artificial intelligence. The probe found itself in a position to choose between ending its mission in the sun's fire and a mathematically improbable defense of humanity, and the potential compromise of its much larger mission. Given the rare opportunity to make its own decision, the probe opted to dither. In the week it took to pass into Jupiter's orbit, the probe took in more data. It scoured the internet for factors to add to the assessment, but the assessment remained the same. Unlikely, but possible. By the time it shot past Mars, the probe still hadn't made a decision. As the time to adjust course for Earth or continue into the sun approached, the probe conducted a final scan of cloud storage servers for any new information, and found something interesting. While the new information made only a negligible impact on the assessment, the probe adjusted course to Earth. It hadn't traveled all this way for nothing. In the desert south of Phoenix, Arizona, it landed with no more fanfare than a slight thump and a few startled cows. Then it broke into the local cell network and made a call. Mark Ibarra awoke to his phone ringing at max volume, playing a pop ditty that he hated with vehemence. He rolled off the mattress that lay on the floor and crawled on his hands and knees to where his cell was recharging. His roommate, who paid the majority of their rent and got to sleep on an actual bed, grumbled and let off a slew of slurred insults. Mark reached his cell and slapped at it until the offending music ended. He blinked sleep from his eyes and tried to focus on the caller's name on the screen. The only people who'd call at this ungodly hour were his family in Basque country, or maybe Jessica in his applied robotics course wanted a late-night study break. The name on the screen was Answer Me. He closed an eye and reread the name. It was way too early, or too late, depending on one's point of view, for this nonsense. He turned the ringer off and went back to bed. Sleep was about to claim him when the phone rang again, just as loudly as last time, but now with a disco anthem. "Seriously?" his roommate slurred. Mark declined the call and powered the phone off. He flopped back on his bed and curled into his blanket. To hell with my first class, he thought. Arizona State University had a lax attendance policy, one which he'd abused for nights like this. The cell erupted with big band music. Mark took his head out from beneath the covers and looked at his phone like it was a thing possessed. The phone vibrated so hard that it practically danced a jig on the floor, and the screen flashed Answer Me over and over again as music blared. "Dude," said his roommate, now sitting up in his bed. Mark swiped the phone off the charging cord, and the music stopped. The caller's name undulated with a rainbow of colors, and an arrow appeared on the screen, pointing to the button he had to press to answer the call. When did I get this app? He thought. Mark sighed and left the bedroom, meandering into the hallway bathroom with the grace of a zombie. The battered mattress he slept on played hell with his back and left him stiff every morning. Dropping his boxers, he took a seat on the toilet and answered the call, determined to return this caller's civility with some interesting background noise. "What?" he murmured. "Mark Ibarra. I need to see you." The voice was mechanical, asexual in its monotone. "Do you have any friggin' idea what time it is? Wait, who the hell is this?" You must come to me immediately. We must discuss the mathematical proof you have stored in document title This Can't Be Right. Doc. Mark shot to his feet. The boxers around his ankles tripped him up, and he stumbled out of the bathroom and fell against the wall. His elbow punched a hole in the drywall, and the cell clattered to the floor. He scooped the phone back up and struggled to breathe as a sudden asthma attack came over him. How? He couldn't finish his question until he found his inhaler in the kitchen, mere steps away in the tiny apartment. He took a deep breath from the inhaler and felt the tightness leave his lungs. That someone knew of his proof was impossible. He'd finished it earlier that night and had encrypted it several times before loading it into a cloud file that shouldn't have been linked to him in any way. How do you know about that? He asked. You must come to me immediately. There is little time. Look at your screen, the robotic voice said. His screen changed to a map program, displaying a pin in an open field just off the highway, connecting Phoenix to the suburb of Maricopa. Come. Now. Mark grabbed his keys. An hour later, his jeans ripped from scaling a barbed wire fence, Mark was surrounded by desert scrub. The blue of the morning rose behind him, where his beat-up Honda waited on the side of the highway. With his cell to his ear, Mark stopped and looked around before deciding how to continue. Spiked ocotillo plants looked a lot like benign mesquite trees in the darkness. A Native American casino in the distance served as his North Star, helping him keep his bearings. "You're not out here, are you? I'm being punked, aren't I?" he asked the mysterious caller. You are 9.26 meters to my east-southeast. Punk, decayed wood, used as tinder. Are you on fire? The caller said. Mark rolled his eyes. This wasn't the first time the caller had used the non-standard meanings of words during what passed as conversation between the two. Mark had tried to get the caller to explain how he knew about his theorem and why they had to meet in the middle of the desert. The caller had refused to say anything. He would only reiterate that Mark had to come quickly to see him, chiding him every time Mark deviated from the provided driving directions. "If you're so close, why can't I see you?" he asked. He took a few steps in what he thought was a northwesterly direction and squished into a cow patty.